Welcome to Swilhelm's Horror. We are a growing channel dedicated to bringing you the scariest stories that we are able to get our hands on. So if you enjoy that type of content and like hearing true stories that are guaranteed to send chills up your spine, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to our channel. And be sure to hit that notification bell as we plan on uploading 2 or more times per week. After being married for just under 15 years, Jerry and Cindy Young were proud to say that the two had done really well for themselves. Not only did they each have an impressive job, after saving up, they had finally paid off the house that they were currently living in. You see, Cindy was a lawyer and Jerry was a well-respected realtor, and they had managed to buy what they would often refer to as their dream house. It was a really nice-sized home surrounded by nature. They lived at the end of a long road which they had to themselves, and their house was surrounded by trees. It was a 3-bedroom home, and since Jerry and Cindy chose not to have any children, most of the rooms were filled with various things that they both loved. One room was designed to be a quiet room, and with all its walls being lined with books, it made the perfect library for the happy couple. Meanwhile, the other room was renovated into a full walk-in wine cellar, where the couple would keep their favorite collections of wine and spirits. As for their bedroom, it had a California king bed that faced a large TV for the two to stream their movies on. But perhaps the coolest part about the Youngs' home was something that was inside of their massive walk-in closet. It was there that Jerry had installed a panic room. You see, ever since he was a child, Jerry had this fear that someone would break in and try to hurt him or his family. So when he could afford it, he had always said that he would get a panic room installed. It was a small 6x8 steel room that had one monitor in it next to a phone. The outside of the panic room looked like something out of a heist movie. It looked like a very secure safe with a digital keypad on it in case the door had been sealed from the inside. The one flaw in the panic room is that when it was installed, there was no way to hook up the phone without getting a separate contractor involved, and that was something that Jerry kept putting off because of his hectic schedule. Thankfully, he wouldn't have to use it as long as no one tried to break in. Sadly for Jerry, it was April 4th of 2011 when Cindy was woken up by the sound of the front door bursting open. She looked to her left to see if her husband had woken up from the noise and possibly knew what it was, but Jerry wasn't there. Instead, he had been making himself a late-night meal in the kitchen when he too was startled by the sound that had just woken up his wife. Jerry turned to the kitchen entrance and peered down the small hallway to the front door. There he saw 4 men, all dressed in dark clothing, rushing into his house. They were looking around as if to catch their bearings when one of them locked eyes with Jerry, and he yelled out for Jerry not to move. Cindy, who heard this, quietly ran into the closet in the bedroom and placed herself inside of the panic room. She waited a few seconds before closing the door, hoping that Jerry would somehow manage to get away from the intruders. But once Jerry didn't make it, she knew that he had been grabbed. The two had once discussed what should happen if someone broke in, and the deal was to make it to the safe room and to secure it. The idea was objects could be replaced, but lives couldn't. So Cindy made the tough decision to close the door and secure it. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the 4 men had Jerry, and after roughing him up a little bit, they proceeded to tie his hands and feet together and then begin searching the house. It was at that point that the men began tossing over everything they could find, looking for anything that might be of value. And as one of the men headed towards the bedroom, Jerry could only hope that his wife had managed to hide herself away. Lucky for him, she had. But it wasn't long before the men found the large metal room inside the Young's closet. At first, they couldn't make heads or tails of what it was, but one of the men was fairly certain that it was a safe, which to them meant that something valuable was in it. They tried to force the door open with brute strength, but there was no point to it. There was no way that a person could pry that door open. That was when they turned their attention back to Jerry, the guy who knew the combination to get in. At first they asked him what was inside, and Jerry was so afraid that he couldn't even think of a lie to tell them. So instead of telling them about his wife, he just stayed quiet. That was when one of the intruders began hitting Jerry with a rolling pin that they had found in one of the kitchen drawers. At first, it was just swings to his body, but he wasn't about to give up any information that could potentially hurt his wife. This enraged the intruders, who all had begun beating on Jerry for multiple minutes, and by the time that they had stopped, Jerry wasn't moving at all. Over the next few hours, the men continued to tear apart the Youngs' house, periodically trying to get into the panic room, which they still thought was a safe. But after a while, they gave up and just decided to take anything that they could. This included jewelry from the bedroom, the TVs, and their laptops. After the men had left, Cindy came rushing out of the panic room and to her husband's side. He wasn't breathing. Cindy called the authorities, and when they got there, she was able to give them the tape of the security footage that was captured from the safe room. And that was when officers realized Cindy probably watched from the cameras in the panic room the whole time, helplessly, as the men beat her husband to death.